May 18th, 2010. It's a Tuesday afternoon in San Francisco, and lots of people are strolling the Embarcadero, a bustling waterfront promenade in the city by the bay.
The Embarcadero in San Francisco is where the old port was, so it's like this long, kind of lovely promenade all along kind of the eastern section of the city.
You have cruise ships pulling in there. You have numerous restaurants down there, and there's all kinds of different things for the tourists to view.
But one local man, out for a stroll with his niece, soon spots something that isn't on the typical tourist itinerary.
What is this?
There was a suitcase in the water near the rocks, close to the seawall.
It was a fairly large suitcase, and by the way, it was partially submerged. It looked like something heavy was inside.
After spotting the suitcase, the man and his niece walk down to the firehouse at the foot of the Bay Bridge.
The firehouse is just very close to maybe 100 yards, 200 yards away.
The firehouse was where the department's fireboats and water rescue units were based.
They came over and somebody entered the water and retrieved the suitcase.
The firefighter, while he was pulling the suitcase up onto the rocks, the suitcase opened.
There was a body inside.
It was what appeared to be a female.
There's no ID on the body or anywhere in the suitcase.
There was no luggage tag or anything else.
But once the crime scene unit arrives on the scene, they'll soon discover the dead woman's name.
They take fingerprints, and it's checked through the computer database.
We were able to identify who she was by way of her fingerprints.
The woman in the suitcase was 52-year-old Perla Lewis.
Perla Lewis lived most of her life in the Bay Area.
My grandmother moved out here with her when she was a child, and she grew up in the Oakland area.
Perla had a good upbringing. She wasn't a street kid.
She had a huge personality. She was extremely funny.
Although on her way to adulthood, Perla took a wrong turn.
Perla connected with this girl that introduced her to the crack cocaine.
She did have a tough stint with bad choices and drug abuse.
As Perla got older, she still struggled with her addiction, even after experiencing the joy of becoming a mother.
She didn't hurt other people. She had her addiction, true enough, but she loved her family.
Even if she had to make some hard choices when it came to her children.
Growing up, we lived with our grandmother.
The alternative was for her to drag her kids and maybe be homeless.
Perla spent as much time with her kids as she could, but knew they were in good hands.
As an adult, I understood why she had my grandmother raise us. And so I was thankful that she did that because I understood the sacrifice that she made.
With her children safe with their grandmother, Perla gravitated to the part of San Francisco known as the Tenderloin.
It's an area that's down on its luck.
There was all these places called SROs, which are called single room occupancy hotels, which are all over the Tenderloin.
There are a lot of addicts out there. There's a lot of crime that's reported there.
But for Perla, it was home.
The Tenderloin was a place where she could just be herself, and there was no judgment.
We would go over there. We got to see that other side.
We lived in like two very different worlds. With my grandmother, we went to private schools, went to church, played sports, piano, and then like with my mom, our community was completely different because it was the drug dealers and the drug users.
All the while, Perla continued struggling with her own demons.
There were plenty of times when she would say she was done with it and she was working on getting clean and sober. It was kind of like a back and forth struggle.
For much of that time, she wasn't fighting alone. For 10 years, she lived with a fellow addict named David.
He was probably the longest relationship she had, and he would come around the family, holidays.
You wouldn't look at them and have been like, oh, they're on drugs. You would have never guessed that they were struggling the way that they were. But they did. They struggled.
There were times when they were panhandling together on the streets.
Until David finally decided to make a change.
David basically was like, it's time to get our lives together.
He came back and got my mom, and he actually got my mom clean.
But sobriety was no guarantee against tragedy.
She called us, and she was like, David died. He died from a heart attack.
Within like weeks, she was back in the Tenderloin. It was toxic and unhealthy.
Perla wasn't a bad person. She wasn't robbing people. She just had that addiction.
She would drift between various single occupancy hotel rooms in and around the Tenderloin area.
But she was rarely alone.
After David, she's kind of bounced around in different relationships and not the healthiest ones.
Until at the end of 2008, she started seeing a man named Lee Bell.
She did bring Lee over at times to meet the family.
Nice to meet you.
He came around and he got introduced to everybody.
Your kids, they're nice.
Thanks. Not sure I deserve the credit, though.
Don't sell yourself short.
And by the spring of 2010, there were signs that Perla was finally getting her life back on track.
Perla had checked herself into a treatment center where she could live while she got healthy.
Then, on May 9th, she took another important step.
She got baptized on Mother's Day.
She just renewed her commitment to God.
Everybody coming for this big ceremony to see her baptized. And so it was just a good feeling.
But after church, Perla headed back to the Tenderloin.
And I'm like, man, we want to take you out. And she was like, well, I'm about to go eat with my friends. I gave her a hug, and I was like, I love you.
See you later, Mom. Love you. I love you so much, Mom. I love you too. See you later.
We didn't know that was the last time that we were going to see her alive.
Now, more than a week later, police have found Perla's body in a suitcase by the bay.
There was a news story, and they were saying that it was a woman that had been found in a suitcase.
If somebody's put in a suitcase is news. I mean, more than just if somebody's murdered, because it's gruesome, you know.
The woman's name hadn't been released to the public yet, but Perla's family just had this sinking feeling about it.
I texted my sister, stuff like this makes me think of Mom.
On Mother's Day 2010, after years of struggling with drug addiction, 52-year-old Perla Lewis made what friends and family hoped was a big step towards getting her life back on track.
She joined church, she got baptized, she had reconnected with God.
Just knowing that she went ahead and took that step was very comforting.
Now, 9 days later, firefighters have dragged Perla's body out of the San Francisco Bay.
She'd been stuffed into a suitcase.
It wasn't a huge suitcase, and the body was positioned like a fetal position.
We estimate she had been in the water at least overnight, so maybe 10 hours, if not more.
There's almost no evidence of decomposition.
The bay water in San Francisco is anywhere from 45 degrees to around 55 degrees.
However, while the condition of the body makes identification easy, there's nothing to indicate how she died.
The police try to keep a relatively open mind and make sure that it was not perhaps where somebody else found the body and just wanted to hide it.
We don't know if, maybe she died of natural causes. Maybe she had overdosed, or who knows, had a heart attack and someone was trying just to get rid of the body.
While the medical examiner's crew removes the body for autopsy, detectives head back to the station and dig into the dead woman's background.
There was a missing persons report stating that Perla Lewis was missing from this residential care facility.
Although staff at the treatment facility had made the report, it does list Perla's next of kin.
We made contact with Perla's daughter, and we set up an appointment to talk to her.
When Aisha Lewis arrives at the station, she confirms that she and her siblings didn't initially worry about their mom going off the radar.
The place that she was staying filed a missing persons report, but there have been times before where it would be a couple of days when we didn't hear from her. So it wasn't quite alarming.
For the moment, detectives hold off on telling Aisha that her mother is dead.
We did not tell her because we wanted to receive all the information without a built-in bias to whoever Perla was around.
They were asking me questions about my mom. Who were her friends? Where did she go? What did she do?
What Aisha tells detectives makes an accidental overdose sound like a distinct possibility.
I mean, she's had some issues for a long time.
What kind of issues?
Drugs.
When you're in that lifestyle of drug abuse, it's always an up and down roller coaster. Sometimes she's in a program, sometimes she, wouldn't be.
According to Aisha, though, her mom had been working really hard to get her life back on track.
She even got baptized a couple of weeks ago. She's really trying to turn things around for good this time.
Aisha also confirms that Perla had been living at the treatment facility up until her disappearance.
Are there any men in her life?
Yeah, she's been seeing this guy, Bleep, for a couple of years.
Have you met him?
A few times. He's a nice guy.
But as the interview continues, Aisha begins to grow uneasy.
It seems though she knew in the back of her mind that we're there for more than a missing person.
I was like, look, sir, I've been answering your questions. What's going on? What are we doing here?
I'm just wondering, have you seen the news?
I have.
It was on every single channel. Woman found in a suitcase.
I'm afraid that I have some really bad news.
When we told Aisha that the person in the suitcase was her mother, it was terrible.
No.
And I lost it.
No.
And I believe she said that she knew it. She just knew it.
I knew it.
She ran out of the room in tears, and that's not what we wanted, but that's how it happened.
It was the worst feeling I have ever felt.
After her interview, Aisha shares the tragic news with her siblings.
I was like, that was Mom? And then from there, I lost it. I remember, I think I was punching walls. I busted my knuckles somehow. I will never forget that. Never in life. It was the worst. It was the worst day ever.
I lived very close to my brother. I was walking home and I saw my sister's car. And before they said anything to me, I knew.
While Perla's family struggles with their grief, the detectives try to retrace her final movements.
We went to the residential care facility, and we ended up interviewing the individual who reported Perla missing.
She was doing such a good job here.
I don't know the whole program down there, but she seemed to be slowing down. She looked better too. And when I'd see her, she didn't look like she had been using.
The nurse tells detectives that Perla asked for a day pass out of the facility on May 16th.
Any idea where she went when she left here?
Well, I know where she said she was going.
According to the nurse, Perla had plans with her boyfriend, Lee Bell.
Did she say where?
Well, no, just that she was meeting up with him to get some money.
And that was the last time that they saw her.
She kind of fell off the map after that.
A city with a long history of drug use. Roughly 4,000 people are admitted for substance abuse treatment in San Francisco each year. In 2013, alcohol was the primary substance abused by patients admitted for treatment. Heroin was the second highest, followed by cocaine and methamphetamine. San Francisco detectives investigating the death of Perla Lewis have just learned that she'd signed herself out of a treatment center in order to see her boyfriend, Lee Bell.
Perla had confided in the nurse that she was going to see Lee Bell because Lee owed her money.
I begged her not to go see him.
Why?
I thought he was a bad influence.
Everyone who worked at this care facility knew Lee Bell.
The staff also knew that Lee was a fellow addict.
Was it possible that Perla left the treatment center and fell right back into her old habits?
That was like typical, behavior. Doing stints in the hospital, like that's vacation, to get herself back on her feet, and then she's back out again. That was tough, just kind of the up and down of her drug abuse and her lifestyle.
Back at the station, running Lee's name through the database provides detectives with an address.
He was on probation for grand theft.
According to his probation records, Lee's last known address was a residential hotel in the Tenderloin district.
We ended up going to that address. There, the desk clerk was able to positively identify Lee Bell as the person who'd been staying there, and then we showed him a picture of Perla. And he said, oh, yes, she had visited Mr. Bell on a number of occasions, and the last time was on Sunday, May 16th at approximately 7 o'clock in the evening.
When was the last time you saw
The clerk tells detectives he saw Lee and Perla leave the hotel together.
We're able to establish a timeline that he was the one person last seen with Perla alive in front of that hotel.
After talking to the clerk, detectives go and knock on Lee's door.
Mr. Bell?
Yeah?
We're here to ask you a few questions about Perla Lewis.
Perla? Is she some type of trouble or something?
When told that she was dead, he just said, I didn't know that. When did that happen?
We found her this morning.
Afraid it'd be something like that.
Of course, Lee and Perla were both addicts, so her ending up dead wasn't necessarily a total surprise.
He didn't seem shocked. He really didn't show a whole lot of emotion.
When was the last time you saw her?
Sunday. She came by here.
When?
7:30, something like that.
Lee's story had fit with what detectives had learned from the desk clerk and the nurse.
Lee also provides a detail that detectives didn't know.
We heard she needed some money.
She got herself in a little bit of trouble.
According to Lee, Perla owed money to a street dealer named Chubb.
Chubb?
Yeah, that's what they call him.
Lee says he doesn't know Chubb's real name, only that he hangs around Bodecker Park in the Tenderloin.
At the time, Bodecker Park was pretty notorious for drug trafficking.
Violence happens there, drug dealing, prostitution.
It was really nobody's turf. It was drug dealers from all over the place, kind of just out there, just selling drugs.
Could a debt to a dealer explain why Perla's body ended up in the Bay?
Crime in the Tenderloin was around drug lifestyle. For example, someone being ripped off because of the drugs, or selling drugs and getting ripped off because they're selling drugs, things of that nature.
When she left here, was she going to see Chubb?
I really don't know.
Lee said he didn't know what, if anything, happened between Chubb and Perla.
But he does know one thing.
He denied any involvement with Perla's death.
Mind if we look around?
No, go ahead.
Thanks.
A quick search of the hotel room doesn't reveal anything suspicious, nor is there any indication that Lee had been involved in any sort of struggle.
I don't remember any injuries to Lee.
However, that didn't mean detectives were entirely ready to write him off.
When we were done with our interview, what we ended up doing is set up a surveillance team to follow him.
Then, when detectives arrive back at the station, they get their first solid piece of evidence.
The medical examiner's office completed their report.
The autopsy reveals extensive bruising that wasn't visible to investigators at the scene.
The pathologist noted over 30 contusions on her body.
But it's another injury that really tells the tale.
Perla had a broken hyoid. That's a bone in her neck.
She had been strangled.
This was definitely a murder.
24 hours after firefighters pulled a suitcase containing Perla Lewis's body from San Francisco Bay, police are officially investigating her murder.
The medical examiner's office ruled her death a homicide.
A bone in her neck was broken, suggesting to the pathologist that she had been strangled.
Detectives also have a possible lead on her killer.
According to Perla's boyfriend, Lee Bell, she owed money to a street dealer named Chubb.
Chubb supposedly deals around Bodecker Park, a seedy hangout spot in the part of town known as the Tenderloin.
The park's been cleaned up since Perla's murder, but in 2010, it was pretty notorious for crime.
It's not a place where you want to find yourself. There's a lot of narcotics, there's a lot of thefts, there's a lot of violence that happens there.
Hoping to get a lead on the mysterious Chubb, detectives head down to the park.
Hey, how are you doing today?
I'm good.
They started canvassing the homeless who spent most of their days camped out around the park.
Thanks.
I'm gonna ask you a few questions.
Oftentimes, folks don't want to cooperate with the police because that in and of itself carries ramifications from other people in the neighborhood.
Despite that, many of the regulars around the park are willing to answer questions about Perla. However, it's a different story when detectives ask about the drug dealer Perla was supposedly in debt to.
Familiar with that name? Anybody that goes by that?
Everyone detectives talked to claimed that they'd never heard of a dealer that went by Chubb.
But does that mean he doesn't exist?
In a lot of different homicide cases, there's people out there that witnessed it and they won't come forward because they're afraid or they think that someone's going to call them snitch. But it's all about do what's right.
While detectives canvass the park, Perla's family blankets the area with flyers.
We were out down by the Embarcadero passing out flyers, just trying to figure out what happened.
The woman in the suitcase also got plenty of coverage in the local press.
I remember there being a push to solve it because it was a touristy area. It was such an egregious crime.
Feeling the heat, homicide detectives reach out to the narcotics unit, hoping they have info on the elusive Chubb.
Unfortunately, no one in the narcotics unit had any leads for detectives.
It could be anybody. Perla could have met somebody during the course of the week or the month. The people on the street only know so much.
A search through the database is no help either.
However, when detectives ran Perla's name through their computer, something did pop up.
We run her through the databases to gain any additional information that would help us to determine what may have happened.
In addition to the missing persons report, we were also able to see that there was a documented history of domestic violence.
Some of the reports involve Perla's boyfriend, Lee Bell.
Perla had made accusations that Lee had assaulted her. And then there was another event where Lee had made an accusation where Perla had threatened him. That's when we really started looking at Lee Bell as a potential person of interest.
Despite the accusations in the reports, neither of those cases resulted in an arrest.
As to why that is, I don't know. I can speculate that there wasn't enough corroborative information to make an arrest, or that maybe Perla Lewis had changed her mind about having Lee arrested.
Lee's name isn't the only one in the reports, though.
Perla Lewis and Lee Bell, we know, were in an on and off relationship. At least on one occasion, she provided a different name.
Did Perla have another boyfriend that no one knew about? The other man's name appears in a report dated January of 2010 4 months prior to Perla's murder.
According to the report, Perla had gone to the emergency room with 4 broken ribs and a gash on her forehead.
Perla Lewis told doctors that she was abused.
The hospital called the police.
One of our investigators from the domestic violence unit did show up to conduct a follow-up.
And when police arrived, Perla identified her assailant.
She was interviewed.
It was my boyfriend.
She did say my boyfriend.
According to Perla, his name was Colin Humphreys.
Detectives investigating the murder of Perla Lewis have learned that 4 months prior to her death, she had accused a man named Colin Humphreys of assaulting her.
That time, she had broken ribs, broken fingers.
If this guy Colin Humphreys put Perla in the hospital, he could definitely be her killer.
Was he also the mysterious drug dealer the detectives have been trying to locate?
According to Perla's boyfriend, Lee Bell, she owed money to a dealer who went by the street name of Chubb.
When the homicide detectives dig a little deeper into the report, they make a disturbing discovery.
The police officer who interviewed Perla about her injuries did so with Lee Bell in the room.
Lee Bell was sitting right next to her, and Perla introduced him, and he introduced himself as her brother.
That's my brother, Lee.
The question is, why would Perla lie to police about who Lee was?
To the detectives investigating Perla's murder, the answer seems obvious.
Rather than a man named Colin, in reality, it was probably Lee who had put her in the hospital.
The detective is interviewing her about her injuries while the abuser is in the room.
Of course, when she was interviewed, she named some random name so that it wasn't tied back to him.
Now suspicious of Lee, detectives reach out to Perla's friends and family, but they have little firsthand knowledge of abuse.
My mom didn't speak to me much about him.
She never said, oh, he'd slap me or push me in the wall or anything. Nothing. She never did she say a word to me.
She definitely kept a lot from me about his abusive nature.
However, the family says they did have their suspicions.
There was nothing that I remember that was just glaring. It was just something like, something is not right, you know?
There was an incident maybe 6 months into their relationship where he broke her arm, and I was like, Mom, like, what happened to your arm? And she told me that she had got robbed in the Tenderloin.
She would cover it up and say there was something else. And come to find out it was him.
I think that my mother did not know her worth and didn't know her own strength, and that's why she stayed with him.
Maybe she just felt like she had it under control or something. I don't know.
But now detectives believe her love for Lee ultimately cost Perla her life.
Other than Lee Bell, our investigation did not identify anybody else as a possible suspect.
At this point, detectives doubted that Colin or the drug dealer Chubb even existed.
Detectives figure it's time they paid another visit to Lee Bell. But he's given the surveillance team the slip.
When they contacted the hotel where Lee was staying, they also discovered that he had checked out.
Since Lee Bell was on probation, we got in contact with the probation department.
Legally, he was supposed to let his probation officer know whenever there was a change of address.
Lee Bell was in fact in violation of the conditions of his probation.
During the course of the investigation, there's a lot of ups and downs.
But there's also an unexpected break.
I looked at my answering machine at work, and the red light was on.
The story had been released to the media at this point, and we had a lot of anonymous leads coming in.
And one lead seems more promising than most.
I listened to it, and it was the person from the Drake Hotel.
The Drake is another single-room occupancy residential hotel in the Tenderloin.
The manager of the Drake Hotel happened to be on vacation when this investigation was in its early steps. And he came back to the Drake and he saw a flyer with Perla's picture on their bulletin board. And he gave us a phone call.
He said he may have information about Perla's murder.
When detectives go to the hotel and speak with the manager, he says that he knows Lee quite well.
Hello.
Mr. Lee had been a resident at this place from December 1999 up until March of
San Francisco PD. Are you the one that called?
2010, right on there.
Have you seen him since he moved out?
Yes, that's why I called you. He showed up on
And he
the
alerted
17th
us to the fact that on May 17th, Monday,
to retrieve a
Mr. Lee
suitcase
showed up
that we
at
had
that
been
hotel and had retrieved a suitcase that he had had in storage.
A suitcase?
Yeah.
May 17th was the day before firefighters had fished the suitcase containing Perla's body out of the bay.
Can you describe it to us?
Actually, I can just show you if you'd like to come around.
He has video of Lee Bell at the hotel picking up a suitcase.
And when detectives look closely, it's clear it's not just any suitcase.
Sure enough, had striking similarities to the suitcase that was recovered with Perla inside of it.
She was a poor black woman, and poor black women are more likely to end up this way than anybody else in terms of how it works in America, and nobody seems to care. My coverage, when I was doing this kind of stuff, I was always trying to do the kind of work that would at least make sure that anybody who died or was killed in San Francisco deserved to have their story told.
Detectives investigating the murder of Perla Lewis have just uncovered what appears to be a crucial piece of evidence against her boyfriend, Lee Bell.
The day before firefighters fished the suitcase containing Perla's body from the San Francisco Bay, Lee was caught on camera doing something pretty incriminating.
It was Mr. Lee showing up and retrieving the suitcase from this particular hotel.
The hotel's security cameras had recorded the entire incident.
On the surveillance video, the case itself was the exact configuration of the one that we had recovered. Even the stitching, the piping, I had very little doubt in my mind that this was a suitcase.
However, the surveillance video alone isn't enough for an arrest.
Well, that was pivotal for us, but still circumstantial.
But even as detectives continue to work the case, their prime suspect ends up in custody.
The day after that, Lee Bell was taken into custody by the probation department for having violated his felony probation conditions.
Once detectives learn that Lee is in custody, they arrange to go down to the county jail to question him.
We confronted Mr. Lee again to see if we could get him to provide us some admissions.
But Lee isn't about to admit to anything.
I already told you guys all that I know.
He held true to his story that he did not kill Perla. He didn't know how she died.
He also insists he'd never hurt Perla.
Man, she was the one who used to hurt me.
He tried to portray himself as the victim, that Perla was the one that had anger issues.
Which was the exact opposite of everything that friends and family had told police about Perla.
Perla wasn't a violent person at all. And if she hit him, it was probably just trying to keep him from hitting her.
My mom was not abusing that man.
In addition to being violent, Lee also accuses Perla of being unfaithful.
He tried to throw, she was with other people.
One of them must have killed her.
He said, when I get out of here, I'm gonna find out who did this.
But detectives are convinced they already have her killer. And on June 7th, 2010, they finally get the proof they've been waiting for.
Our crime lab recovered Lee Bell's DNA from the handle of the suitcase. where Perla was placed and thrown into the water.
Once they have the DNA results, detectives officially charge Lee with first-degree murder.
That, for us, was the last nail in his coffin. With that information, we were able to charge him.
It's welcome news for Perla's family.
The detectives, they did amazing work, and I'm thankful that the police had arrested him.
It was very intense, emotional, and I cried and I cried and I cried.
I was just happy that he was off the streets.
But the family's quest for justice is just beginning.
There's all kinds of ways that you can delay a trial now.
He would play games with the legal system, and it was incredibly frustrating.
He kept changing attorneys, and that extended the time that he remained in San Francisco County Jail by years and years and years.
At one point, they came to me with a plea deal, and I was livid. I felt like that was a slap in the face, and I just revved it up. I don't care what happens. Take it all the way to the appeals.
It's not until May 18th, 2017, 7 years after Perla's murder, that Lee Bell finally goes on trial.
Perla's family was suffering for that 7 years, but Lee Bell was still in jail. It's not as though he gained this great advantage.
But is he just delaying the inevitable? Or is a conviction anything but guaranteed?
There was no murder scene that the prosecution could ever give. Like, where did this occur?
We were unable to really determine exactly where the suitcase entered the water.
When you look at the case overall, there isn't that beautiful, clear-cut moment where you know.
Instead, the prosecutors begin by laying out Lee's history of abusing Perla.
There were a number of domestic violence reports involved in this relationship.
Therefore, it isn't all that difficult for prosecutors to construct a theory of what happened.
Prosecutors claim that just as she told the nurses when she left the treatment facility, Perla had gone to see Lee looking for money.
You owe me more money. Lee, I want you to pay me.
Girl, I don't owe you no money.
According to prosecutors, an argument likely ensued, and Lee became violent.
At some point, Lee must have started choking Perla, and whether he meant to or not, it went too far.
Even worse, he didn't go pick up the suitcase from the other hotel until the next day, which means he stayed in his room overnight with her body.
If we're in a hotel room and you kill me, how are you going to get my body out? It's probably going to be a suitcase.
It could have been the perfect crime.
With Perla's history of addiction and the dangerous people she had contact with on the streets, there had been a lot of explanations if she had simply disappeared.
If the tide would have been going out, we'd have never known what happened to Perla.
Instead, the tide had carried the suitcase back to the Embarcadero.
They had the surveillance of him with the suitcase.
We did have a one-to-one hit from a sample that we took from Lee Bell to DNA recovered from the handle of the suitcase.
It's enough for the jury to find Lee guilty of first-degree murder.
Mr. Lee's sentence was 25 years to life.
If there's justice, I guess it was served.
Despite their pain, Perla's children have tried to draw some positive lessons from the tragic loss of their mother.
When a person doesn't know their worth, they'll settle for way less than they should. You are worth so much more than being with someone who will put their hands on you or will belittle you.
Whenever you are faced with a decision, whether it's to leave or stay, remember my mom didn't get a second chance to make a better choice.
Abuse is never okay. If you or someone you love is in an abusive relationship, there is help available.
At 2:17 a.m., under the dull orange glow of a suburban streetlight, a pair of headlights cut through the quiet of Western Sydney, illuminating a house that had held its breath for 20 years. A knock on the door, a flicker of movement behind the curtains. And then, the moment that would turn a cold case into a midnight arrest. Sydney 2005 cold case solved, family secret leads to midnight arrest. The headline would come later. But on that night, it was only the sound of footsteps on concrete and the weight of a secret that had rotted in silence for 2 decades. Rewind to winter 2005. A modest brick home in a quiet neighborhood where neighbors borrowed sugar and children rode bicycles until dusk. Inside that house lived a family that appeared ordinary. A mother known for her gentle smile, a teenage daughter with plans for university, a younger son who kept to himself, and a father whose temper, some would later whisper, could flare without warning. The victim, 42-year-old Claire Donovan, vanished on a Tuesday evening. She left behind a half-chopped onion on the kitchen bench, her handbag on the couch, and a washing machine still mid-cycle. Mysterious disappearance, community shock. A woman does not simply walk away from her life in the middle of dinner preparations. Police arrived within hours of the missing person report. The front door showed no signs of forced entry. Her phone remained on the charger. Her car was parked in the driveway. Detectives described the scene as frozen in time, a domestic snapshot interrupted. The husband, Mark Donovan, told officers she had stormed out after an argument. He said she needed space. He said she had done this before, but friends contradicted him. Claire had confided in them about tension at home, about fear she could not fully articulate. Strange clue. Bruises explained as clumsiness, arguments muffled behind closed doors. The kind of details that hover at the edge of suspicion but refuse to harden into proof. Days turned into weeks. Volunteers combed nearby bushland. Helicopters swept overhead. The Parramatta River was dragged. No body, no ransom note, no confirmed sightings. Sydney's tabloid splashed her photograph across front pages. Mother of 2 vanishes. Police baffled. The community organized candlelight vigils, lighting up the street where Claire once watered her roses. Her daughter stood before cameras, voice trembling, pleading for her mother to come home. The husband stood beside her, arm draped around her shoulders, eyes red but dry. Investigators focused on the inner circle. Statistics whispered an uncomfortable truth. Most disappearances with no evidence of abduction begin and end within the family. Detectives questioned Mark repeatedly. He maintained his story, an argument, a slammed door, silence. He passed an initial polygraph. Those seasoned officers knew those tests measured nerves, not guilt. Forensics scarred the house. Luminol revealed faint traces in the laundry room, but nothing conclusive. The report labeled them as possible cleaning agents. Dead end, the file thickened, then stalled. Months passed. Claire Donovan's name drifted from headlines to footnotes. The case was reclassified. Suspected homicide, no body recovered. The children grew older under a cloud of suspicion that never fully lifted. At school, whispers followed them down hallways. Community shock hardened into uneasy acceptance. Another cold case added to Sydney's quiet archive of unanswered questions. But cold cases do not sleep, they wait. In 2010, a new detective reviewed the Donovan file. Fresh eyes, fresh doubts. He fixated on the timeline. Mark claimed Claire left at 8:30 p.m., yet a neighbor's security camera captured his car leaving at 9:12 p.m., returning at 10:47 p.m. He had said he stayed home. Confronted with the footage, he adjusted his memory. A late-night drive to clear his head. No significance. Still, there was no physical evidence tying him to a crime. Without a body, prosecutors hesitated. Another deadlock. Years stretched on. The daughter moved interstate. The son, Ethan Donovan, remained in Sydney, quiet, withdrawn. In 2018, he was arrested for an unrelated assault. During questioning, officers noticed his anxiety spike at the mention of his mother's name, a tremor in his voice. A long pause, then nothing. he requested a lawyer. Suspicion flared briefly, then dimmed again. No confession, no breakthrough. Behind closed doors, however, the family's secret festered. According to later testimony, the night Claire vanished was not simply an argument between spouses. It was a confrontation that spiraled out of control. Ethan, then 16, had witnessed more than he ever admitted. He had seen his father shove Claire against the kitchen counter. He had heard the crack of bone against tile. He had watched as panic replaced rage in his father's eyes. An accident, Mark insisted. She fell. She hit her head. She wasn't breathing. We can fix this. We have to protect the family. In 2024, nearly 19 years after Claire's disappearance, Ethan sought therapy for severe anxiety and insomnia, nightmares, flashbacks. The image of his mother lying motionless on the kitchen floor. During a session, he spoke the words he had buried since adolescence. The therapist, bound by mandatory reporting laws, contacted authorities. A quiet tip reopened a file long coated in dust. Detectives moved carefully. They re-examined the house, now owned by another family. Advanced ground-penetrating radar scanned the backyard. A faint anomaly appeared beneath an old concrete slab once used as a patio extension. Strange clue. Records showed that in late 2005, Mark had applied for a minor renovation permit. A simple improvement, he had said, a new outdoor seating area. On a gray morning in early spring 2025, forensic teams broke through the slab. Neighbors gathered at a distance, drawn by the flashing lights and the hum of excavation equipment. Beneath layers of soil, wrapped in deteriorated plastic, lay human remains. The clothing matched the description of what Claire had worn the night she disappeared. Dental records confirmed the identity. Cold case solved, but the shock was only beginning. Police obtained a warrant for Mark Donovan's arrest. He had since remarried, moved to another suburb, built a life that outwardly suggested stability. At 2:17 a.m., officers surrounded his home. The knock echoed through the hallway. When he opened the door, confusion flickered across his face, then recognition. As handcuffs clicked around his wrists, the weight of 20 years collapsed into a single, irreversible moment. During interrogation, confronted with forensic evidence and his son's statement, Mark's composure fractured. He admitted to the altercation but insisted it was unintended. He claimed panic drove him to conceal the body, to fabricate the story of a woman who walked away, protect the children, he said. Protect himself, the evidence suggested, family secret. Midnight arrest, the phrases ricocheted across news broadcasts the following morning. The community that once lit candles now grappled with a different kind of grief. Relief that Claire had been found, horror at the truth. Neighbors recalled the night of her disappearance, the flashing police lights, the quiet street that never felt quite the same afterward. They remembered Mark mowing the lawn days later, as if normalcy could be forced into existence through routine. They remembered the children's hollow expressions at the vigil. Ethan, now in his mid-30s, released a statement expressing remorse for his silence. He described living in fear, manipulated by a father who convinced him that speaking out would destroy what little family he had left. Experts weighed in on the psychology of coercion, on the paralysis of teenage witnesses trapped between loyalty and terror. But for many, the question lingered, could this have been solved sooner? The case file, once a symbol of frustration, became a study in persistence. Advances in forensic technology, the courage of delayed testimony, the relentless hum of detectives who refused to let names fade into obscurity. Claire Donovan was no longer a missing person poster fading under sun and rain. She was a homicide victim whose story had finally been told. Yet resolution does not erase the years stolen. It does not restore birthdays missed, graduations unattended, holidays shadowed by absence. In Western Sydney, the house on that quiet street stands as a reminder that secrets can calcify beneath concrete. That truth can be buried, but not erased. The midnight arrest closed a chapter, but it also reopened wounds that never fully healed. Sydney 2005 cold case solved, family secret leads to midnight arrest. A headline that carries the weight of 2 decades. A community once gripped by mystery now forced to confront betrayal at the heart of a home. And as the courtroom proceedings unfold, as evidence is presented under harsh fluorescent lights, one image remains fixed in collective memory. A kitchen frozen in time, a half-chopped onion, a life interrupted, and the long, relentless march of truth that finally, after 20 years of silence, knocked on the door in the middle of the night. The courtroom doors swing open and the air inside feels heavier than the winter sky outside, charged with anticipation, resentment, and the dull ache of memories that refuse to fade. Sydney watches again, not a disappearance this time, not a search party combing bushland, but a trial that promises answers. The headline shifts from midnight arrest to courtroom reckoning. Nearly 20 years after Claire Donovan vanished from her kitchen in Western Sydney, the man who once stood beside her at barbecues and school assemblies now stands in the dock. Charged with her murder, community shock resurfaces sharper than before, because the enemy was never a stranger in the dark. It was a husband across the dinner table. Prosecutors begin with the timeline, dismantling it piece by piece. Tuesday night, winter 2005, an argument escalating behind closed doors, a teenage son frozen in the hallway, a daughter upstairs with headphones on, unaware that her life is about to fracture. The state paints a picture of control and violence, of a pattern masked by suburban routine. They present photographs from the excavation, images of soil-stained plastic and the concrete slab poured days after Claire vanished. Strange renovation, strange timing. A patio built not for leisure, but for concealment. Mark Donovan sits rigid, jaw clenched, eyes fixed ahead. His defense insists this is a tragic accident twisted by hindsight. They argue there was no intent, no premeditation, only panic, a fall, a head injury, a desperate attempt to protect children from scandal. The word accident echoes through the courtroom, but it lands hollow against forensic reports describing blunt force trauma inconsistent with a simple slip. Medical experts testify that the angle and severity of the fracture suggest force, not misfortune. Each technical term slices through the narrative of innocence. Then comes the testimony that fractures whatever sympathy might have lingered. Ethan Donovan takes the stand. The once silent teenager is now a man in his 30s, shoulders tense, voice controlled but strained. He recounts the argument, the shouting that rattled cabinet doors, the sound of something heavy striking tile. He describes stepping into the kitchen and seeing his mother on the floor, blood threading through strands of her hair. He remembers his father kneeling beside her, not in grief, but in calculation. We have to fix this. We can't lose everything. Those words hang in the air, thick and suffocating. Defense attorneys question his memory, highlight the passage of time, suggest therapy shaped his recollections. They imply resentment, ulterior motives, the influence of media coverage. But Ethan's account remains steady. He admits his silence, his fear, the years spent convincing himself that speaking out would shatter what remained of his family. He describes helping move his mother's body, hands shaking, mind numb, obedience born of terror. The courtroom is silent except for the scratch of a reporter's pen. Family's secret transformed into public testimony. The daughter, now living interstate, appears via video link. She speaks of that night as confusion, of waking to flashing lights and her father's insistence that her mother needed space. She describes the years that followed, birthdays marked by absence, school events overshadowed by whispers. She recalls asking questions and being told to trust, to believe in a narrative that never quite fit. Her voice breaks only once, when she says she kept her mother's last voicemail for years, replaying it on nights when doubt crept in. Prosecutors introduce financial records, insurance policies, settle transfers of funds in the months before the disappearance. Motive takes shape alongside memory. Not a crime of passion alone, they argue, but one entangled with control and money. They reveal that Claire had consulted a solicitor about separation weeks before she vanished. A draft letter is displayed on a courtroom screen. outlining concerns about emotional and physical abuse. Mysterious disappearance begins to look less like a vanishing and more like a silencing. The defense counters with character witnesses. Friends who describe Mark as devoted, hardworking, overwhelmed by stress, but not violent. They speak of backyard gatherings, of laughter, of a man who coached junior football. Two versions of the same life collide under fluorescent lights. Was he a monster hidden in plain sight, or a flawed man who made a catastrophic mistake? The jury watches, listens, weighs. Outside the courthouse, media vans line the street. Cameras track every arrival, every departure. The phrase "cold case solved" scrolls across television screens, yet the trial reveals how incomplete that phrase truly is. Solved does not mean simple. Solved does not entangle trauma. Community members gather in small groups, debating guilt and punishment, recalling where they were when Claire's disappearance first dominated headlines in 2005. Forensic experts testify about the excavation. They detail the ground-penetrating radar anomaly, the careful removal of soil, the moment bone fragments emerged beneath the slab. They describe how concrete can preserve as effectively as it conceals, trapping a crime scene beneath domestic architecture. They confirm the remains were wrapped in materials traced back to the Donovan home, fibers matching those found in the garage. Each scientific detail reinforces what suspicion had whispered for years. Mark eventually takes the stand. It is a risk. His lawyers know, but silence may appear as guilt. He speaks softly, portraying himself as a man who panicked. He describes Claire slipping during a heated argument, his horror when she failed to respond, his terror at the thought of prison, of his children growing up without a father. He insists he loved her. He insists he never meant harm. Under cross-examination, inconsistencies surface. Why the renovation permit days after she vanished? Why lie about leaving the house that night? Why instruct his son to remain silent? His answers falter, tangled in justification. The prosecution presses harder. They present phone records placing him near a hardware store late that night, purchasing cement and tools. They display security footage timestamped within hours of Claire's reported departure. They highlight that no ambulance was called, no attempt made to seek help. Panic, they argue, does not explain calculated concealment. Panic does not pour concrete. As days turn into weeks, the trial becomes a mirror reflecting not only one family's fracture, but the broader question of how violence can hide behind routine. Experts discuss coercive control, the psychological grip that can paralyze victims and witnesses alike. Advocacy groups cite the case as a reminder that missing person reports often mask darker realities. The phrase community shock appears again in headlines, but now it carries a sharper edge, a recognition of warning signs overlooked. Closing arguments arrive with intensity. The prosecution speaks of silence as complicity, of a man who chose self-preservation over truth, who allowed his children to grow up beneath suspicion rather than admit what he had done. They remind jurors of the kitchen scene, the forensic findings, the son's testimony. They ask for accountability, not only for Claire, but for the years stolen from her family. The defense urges caution. They warn against convicting based on emotion, against letting the passage of time distort memory. They argue that without eyewitnesses beyond a traumatized teenager, doubt remains. Reasonable doubt, they repeat, the cornerstone of justice. The jury retreats, hours stretch, reporters refresh feeds, commentators speculate, the community waits once more, just as they did in 2005 when Claire first vanished. Only this time, there is a body, a confession of sorts, a mosaic of evidence pieced together across 2 decades. Sentencing follows weeks later. The judge speaks of betrayal, of trust shattered within the sanctity of a home. He condemns not only the act itself, but the calculated concealment, the manipulation of children, the lies told to police and community. A lengthy prison term is imposed, ensuring that the remainder of Mark's life will unfold behind bars. Outside, microphones capture reactions, relief, grief, anger. The case that once symbolized mystery now stands as a cautionary tale about secrets buried beneath concrete and silence. Claire Donovan's name is spoken not as a question mark, but as a victim whose truth finally surfaced. Yet even with a conviction secured, the story refuses to fade neatly into closure. In Western Sydney, neighbors still glance at the house where a patio once covered a grave. They remember candlelight flickering against brick walls. They remember a family that seemed ordinary. The lingering impact is not only legal but emotional, a reminder that justice delayed can still arrive, but it carries the weight of lost years. Sydney 2005 cold case solved, family secret leads to midnight arrest. The headline now rests beside another, guilty verdict brings long-awaited justice. But beneath those bold words lies a quieter truth. A kitchen once filled with the scent of chopped onions and weekday routine became the epicenter of violence. A son carried silence into adulthood before finding the courage to speak. A community learned that the most chilling mysteries are not always born in dark alleys, but in brightly lit homes where secrets wait, patient and heavy, until the ground itself is broken open and the truth rises into daylight. The prison gates close with mechanical finality, and beyond them the world continues, restless and unforgiving, dissecting every detail of a crime that once seemed destined to remain buried. Sydney does not forget easily. In cafes and office corridors, on talkback radio and late-night television panels, the Donovan case is analyzed again and again, not as a mystery anymore, but as a warning, cold case, family secret. Midnight arrest, guilty verdict, the phrases have become part of the city's vocabulary, shorthand for a truth that hid in plain sight for nearly 20 years. For Claire Donovan's children, however, there are no headlines bold enough to capture the private aftermath. Ethan moves through the days with a cautious stillness, as if any sudden movement might fracture the fragile calm he has fought to build. Therapy continues, no longer centered on confession, but on reconstruction. He speaks of guilt that does not vanish with a verdict, of memories that replay without invitation. He remembers the kitchen floor, the metallic scent in the air, the way his father's voice shifted from rage to cold instruction. Experts call it coercion, survival instinct, trauma bonding. For Ethan, it is simply a night that divided his life into before and after. His sister, now married and living under a different surname, returns to Western Sydney for the first time since the sentencing. She parks across from the old family home, now repainted, renovated again, as if layers of fresh plaster and neutral tones could erase what lies beneath its history. The new owners know the story. Everyone does. They chose to stay. Property values dipped when the excavation made national news, but time, as always, moves forward. Children once again ride bicycles along the footpath. The ordinary reasserts itself, stubborn and indifferent. The community holds a memorial for Claire in a small park not far from the house. A plaque is installed beneath a jacaranda tree, her name etched in bronze. Neighbors who once lit candles on the street now gather in daylight, no longer searching, but remembering. They speak of her kindness, her laughter, the way she volunteered at school events. Some admit, quietly, that they sensed tension in the Donovan home but dismissed it as marital strain. Others confess they saw nothing at all. The haunting question lingers, what did we miss? Journalists revisit archived footage from 2005, grainy clips of Mark standing beside his children, appealing for information. His voice steady, his expression composed. The contrast between then and now unsettles viewers. Commentators discuss how often perpetrators position themselves at the center of searches, how performance can masquerade as grief. Yet hindsight sharpens everything. In real time, the signs are blurred, softened by trust and routine. Legal analysts note the significance of the case beyond its emotional impact. They point to advances in forensic technology, to the growing understanding of coercive control within domestic settings. Police departments across New South Wales quietly review other long-dormant files, cases where bodies were never found, where stories never fully aligned. Claire's case becomes a catalyst, a reminder that concrete can be broken, that silence can crack under the weight of years. Inside prison walls, Mark Donovan begins a different existence. Reports describe him as withdrawn, avoiding media attention, declining interviews. Some inmates recognize his name from television. Infamy carries its own consequences. He maintains that he never intended to kill Claire, clinging to the narrative of accident and panic. But intention no longer alters outcome. The court has spoken. The sentence stands. For Ethan, forgiveness is a concept too complex to approach directly. He grapples not only with his father's actions, but with his own enforced complicity. He replays the moment he chose to stay silent when detectives first questioned him in 2005, the way fear constricted his throat. He wonders how different his life might have been had he spoken then. Therapists remind him he was a child, manipulated and terrified. Logic offers limited comfort against memory. The daughter channels her grief into advocacy, partnering with organizations that support victims of domestic violence. She speaks at community forums, describing how easily appearances deceive, how a well-kept lawn and polite conversation can conceal volatility. She avoids sensationalism, focusing instead on awareness, on encouraging others to trust their instincts when something feels wrong. Her voice carries authority born of lived experience. Anniversaries take on new meaning. The date of Claire's disappearance is no longer solely a day of uncertainty. It is also a marker of resilience, of truth uncovered. Flowers appear at the memorial plaque each winter. Sometimes there are handwritten notes tucked between the stems, messages from strangers thanking her children for their courage. The case has transcended its suburban origins, resonating across Australia as an example of justice delayed but not denied. Yet closure remains an imperfect word. It suggests a neat sealing of wounds, a tidy resolution. The reality is messier. Trauma lingers in subtle ways, in the way Ethan avoids raised voices, in the way his sister double-checks locks before bed. Family gatherings are smaller now, redefined. The absence at the table is permanent, no longer a question mark, but a certainty. Academics study the case, examining how long-term secrecy shapes family dynamics. They analyze interrogation transcripts, court proceedings, psychological reports. The Donovan file becomes material for lectures on criminal behavior, on the intersection of domestic violence and homicide. Students debate the ethical complexities of delayed testimony, the challenges prosecutors face when evidence surfaces decades later. Claire's name appears in footnotes and case studies, her life reduced at times to data points in broader discussions about justice. Media attention eventually shifts, as it always does, to newer crimes, fresher mysteries. But in Western Sydney, the story remains embedded in local memory. Residents recall the day the concrete was broken, the moment the past resurfaced in the form of bone fragments and fabric. They remember the midnight arrest, police lights flickering against sleeping houses. They remember how quickly normality can fracture. Ethan visits his mother's grave alone on quiet mornings. He speaks softly not of the trial or the verdict, but of ordinary things, work, relationships, the small victories of daily life. He tells her he is trying to live honestly to ensure that silence no longer governs his choices. In those moments, the weight he carries feels fractionally lighter. The jacaranda tree near the memorial blooms each spring, purple petals scattering across the grass. Children who never knew Claire play beneath its branches. Life continues, layered over loss. The plaque remains, a simple inscription marking a story that once dominated headlines. Passers-by pause, read her name, and move on, perhaps carrying a fleeting awareness of how fragile certainty can be. Sydney 2005 cold case solved, family secret leads to midnight arrest. The headline marked the end of one chapter, but the deeper narrative is about endurance, a son who found his voice after years of fear, a daughter who transformed grief into advocacy, a community forced to confront the reality that danger can reside within familiar walls. The mystery is no longer who or how. Those questions have answers. The lingering question is how to prevent the next silence, the next secret poured into concrete. In the end, the Donovan case stands as both resolution and reminder. Resolution because truth emerged from beneath a patio slab, because a jury rendered a verdict, because a name once listed as missing now rests in acknowledged memory. Reminder because the path to that truth was long and uneven, marked by hesitation, fear, and the slow evolution of courage. As years pass, the story will compress into a paragraph in history books, a segment in documentaries, a reference in academic journals. But for those who lived it, the narrative remains expansive, textured with pain and resilience. The house on that quiet street no longer draws news crews. The prison gates remain closed. The memorial plaque gathers the occasional fallen petal. And somewhere in Western Sydney, a family reshapes itself around absence, determined that the silence which once defined them will never again dictate their future. The years do not soften the edges of what happened in that kitchen in 2005. They simply layer new routines over old fractures, creating the illusion of distance while the core remains unchanged. Sydney moves forward with relentless energy, new towers rising over familiar streets, new headlines flashing across screens. Yet the Donovan case persists as a reference point whenever conversations turn to hidden violence and long-buried truths. Cold case, family secret, midnight arrest, guilty verdict. The phrases no longer shock, but they still resonate shorthand for the realization that ordinary lives can conceal extraordinary darkness. Ethan Donovan stands at the edge of a lecture hall addressing a group of young police recruits about the psychology of delayed disclosure. He speaks with measured clarity, careful not to sensationalize his past, but honest enough to make the lesson tangible. He explains how fear can masquerade as loyalty, how a child can be convinced that silence is protection, how manipulation can warp memory until doubt feels safer than truth. The recruits listen intently, some scribbling notes, others watching his expression as he recounts the paralysis of that night. He tells them that cases without bodies are not always cases without answers, that persistence matters, that listening carefully to inconsistencies can reopen doors long assumed sealed. After the session, one recruit approaches him, asking how he found the courage to finally speak. Ethan pauses before answering. He explains that courage did not arrive all at once. It accumulated slowly, built from sleepless nights, therapy sessions, and the growing weight of a secret too heavy to carry alone. He describes the moment he realized that protecting a lie was destroying him more thoroughly than any public exposure could. The recruit nods, absorbing not only the procedural lesson, but the human one. Claire's daughter, now a mother herself, watches her children play in a park far from the house where she grew up. She has chosen openness as a guiding principle, determined that no emotion in her home will be buried or dismissed. When conflicts arise, she addresses them directly, refusing the culture of silence that once suffocated her childhood. She sometimes catches herself scanning her partner's tone for hints of volatility, an inherited vigilance she cannot fully extinguish. Trauma may fade, but it also sharpens certain instincts permanently. On the anniversary of Claire's death, media outlets publish reflective pieces examining the broader implications of the case. Journalists revisit the early investigation, the missed opportunities, the technological limitations of 2005. They interview criminologists who explain how advancements in forensic scanning and data retention have transformed cold case work. They discuss the importance of community awareness, of recognizing patterns of coercive control before they escalate into lethal outcomes. Claire's story becomes less about spectacle and more about systemic insight. In prison, Mark Donovan's world has narrowed to routine and reflection. Appeals have been exhausted, legal arguments concluded. He spends long hours in the library reading case law and biographies, perhaps searching for parallels that might recast his own narrative. Reports suggest he maintains that he never intended to kill his wife, clinging to the language of accident and panic. Yet intention no longer alters consequence. The justice system has categorized his actions with finality, and that classification shapes the remainder of his life. Ethan does not visit. The distance between them is not measured in kilometers, but in irrevocable choices. He has wrestled with the idea of confrontation, of demanding explanations, but therapy has led him to understand that some questions yield no satisfying answers. Closure, he has learned, is not granted by an apology or confession. It is constructed internally, piece by piece, through acceptance and forward motion. The neighborhood where Claire once lived continues its quiet evolution. New families occupy old houses, gardens replanted, fences repainted. The jacaranda tree near her memorial blooms faithfully each spring, petals scattering across the plaque engraved with her name. Children ask their parents about the inscription, and the story is told in softened tones, stripped of graphic detail but firm in its message about honesty and vigilance. Over time, the case becomes local lore, a narrative passed down not to frighten but to remind. Academics cite the Donovan case in textbooks exploring long-term concealment and familial coercion. It appears in lectures about forensic breakthroughs and in seminars on the psychological toll of silence. Students debate the ethical complexities of prosecuting decades-old crimes, the reliability of memory, the weight of circumstantial evidence. Claire's life, once reduced to a missing person poster, now informs policy discussions and academic frameworks. Her story contributes to a broader understanding that justice can be delayed but still decisive. Ethan channels his experience into advocacy work, collaborating with organizations that support young witnesses of domestic violence. He helps design workshops aimed at empowering teenagers to seek help safely, to understand that loyalty does not require complicity. Each session feels like a small corrective to his own past, an attempt to ensure that another 16-year-old does not stand frozen in a hallway believing silence is the only option. His sister's advocacy extends into legislative arenas. She meets with policymakers, sharing her perspective on how difficult it was for her mother to navigate separation while fearing retaliation. She pushes for streamlined legal protections and increased funding for crisis services. Her testimony carries weight precisely because it is grounded in lived experience rather than abstract theory. She does not speak in anger, but in determined clarity. As time stretches further from 2005, the intensity of public interest diminishes, yet the personal impact remains woven into daily life. Ethan still wakes occasionally from dreams where the kitchen light flickers and his father's voice echoes. But the dreams no longer dominate his nights. They surface less frequently, receding as he builds new memories that are not defined by fear. He marries in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family. During the vows, he feels the absence of his mother acutely, a quiet ache beneath the joy. He chooses to honor her not with elaborate gestures, but with a commitment to transparency and respect in his own relationship. The past informs his promises, adding gravity to words that might otherwise seem routine. Sydney continues to grow, its skyline shifting, its population expanding. Yet beneath that dynamism lies a collective memory shaped in part by cases like Claire's. Police departments maintain dedicated cold case units, bolstered by public support and technological innovation. The Donovan investigation serves as a reminder within those units that persistence matters, that files long untouched can still hold answers waiting for the right moment, the right tool, the right voice to surface. On quiet evenings, Ethan sometimes drives past the old street, not to dwell, but to measure distance. The house looks unremarkable, indistinguishable from others along the block. It no longer draws curiosity. He parks briefly, observing the ordinary rhythms of suburban life, a dog barking, a television flickering through curtains, a family unloading groceries. He feels a complicated mix of sorrow and gratitude. Sorrow for what was lost, gratitude that truth eventually emerged. Sydney 2005 cold case solved, family secret leads to midnight arrest. The headline once crackled with urgency, a declaration that a mystery had been cracked. Now it reads as a testament to endurance, to the idea that buried truths exert pressure until they surface. The case did not restore a life, but it restored a name, a narrative corrected after years of speculation and doubt. In the final analysis, the Donovan story is not defined solely by violence or betrayal. It is defined by transformation, a frightened teenager becoming an advocate, a grieving daughter becoming a voice for reform, a community evolving from shock to awareness. The concrete that once concealed a body has long been removed, replaced by soil and grass. yet its symbolism endures as a warning about what silence can hide. Life moves forward, imperfect and resilient. The jacaranda blooms, petals fall, seasons turn. And in Western Sydney, beneath the steady hum of everyday existence, the legacy of a cold case solved continues to shape choices, conversations, and commitments, ensuring that the truth uncovered after 20 years does more than close a file. It alters the future, one decision at a time. Time does not announce its passing with headlines, yet the Donovan case continues to ripple outward in ways no one could have predicted on that winter night in 2005. What began as a mysterious disappearance? What hardened into a cold case? What ultimately culminated in a midnight arrest and a courtroom conviction now lives on in quieter transformations. The urgency has faded from television screens, but the consequences endure in policies revised, in conversations reshaped, in lives permanently altered by one act of violence and to decades of silence. Ethan Donovan stands in a modest office overlooking a busy Sydney street, the hum of traffic rising faintly through the glass. He now works full-time in a support organization dedicated to assisting young people affected by domestic instability. The path from terrified teenager to advocate was neither direct nor easy, but it feels intentional. He spends his days meeting adolescents who carry secrets in their posture, who speak carefully, who flinch at sudden noises. He recognizes the signs with painful clarity, hypervigilance, divided loyalty, the instinct to protect a parent even at personal cost. He does not push too hard, knowing firsthand that disclosure cannot be forced. Instead, he creates space, repeating gently that safety and truth are not betrayals. When he shares fragments of his own story in controlled settings, he avoids dramatics. He speaks in measured tones about fear, about the weight of a secret that reshaped his adolescence. He describes how manipulation can distort a young mind, convincing it that silence equals strength. He emphasizes that speaking up is not an act of destruction, but of preservation. After sessions, some teenagers linger, asking tentative questions about what happens next if they tell someone. Ethan answers honestly. He acknowledges that outcomes can be messy, that families can fracture, but he insists that living under constant threat fractures something deeper. Claire's daughter continues her work in policy reform, her focus expanding beyond domestic violence to encompass witness protection for minors within households under investigation. She collaborates with legal experts, drafting proposals aimed at shielding children from retaliation when they disclose abuse. She often references how isolation and fear kept her brother silent for years. The system, she argues, must anticipate that silence and build safeguards around it. Her advocacy is calm but relentless, grounded in the conviction that prevention must begin long before a tragedy reaches the scale of a homicide. In academic circles, the Donovan case is now cited as a turning point in the integration of technological advancements into cold case investigations in New South Wales. Law enforcement agencies reference the use of ground-penetrating radar and improved forensic analysis as critical elements in finally locating Claire's remains. Training modules emphasize the importance of revisiting dormant files with fresh tools and perspectives. The phrase cold case no longer implies inevitability of failure. It suggests unfinished work waiting for renewed attention. Mark Donovan remains incarcerated, his name occasionally resurfacing in discussions about rehabilitation and accountability. Prison reports describe him as compliant but withdrawn. He participates in mandated programs addressing anger management and domestic violence, though the extent of his introspection remains private. For Claire's children, his daily routine is irrelevant. The legal chapter closed with sentencing. Emotional resolution remains a separate, ongoing process. Ethan sometimes reflects on the duality of justice. The conviction brought validation and public acknowledgement, yet it did not erase the formative years shaped by fear. He recognizes that justice operates on a structural level, assigning responsibility and consequence, while healing operates internally, requiring patience and deliberate effort. He has come to accept that some scars will remain visible only to him, faint but permanent. Community memory continues to evolve, In Western Sydney, the house where Claire once lived has fully reintegrated into the fabric of normality. Neighbors rarely mention its history unless prompted. Children who play on the footpath were not yet born when the disappearance dominated news cycles. The jacaranda tree near the memorial plaque blooms reliably each year, its purple canopy casting soft shadows over Claire's name. Visitors still leave flowers on anniversaries, though the gatherings are smaller, more intimate. Media retrospectives have shifted tone over time. Early coverage centered on shock and revelation. Later pieces explored systemic lessons and psychological complexities. Now, articles tend to focus on long-term impact, on how one case influenced broader awareness of coercive control within domestic settings. Experts discuss patterns of escalation, warning signs often dismissed as private matters. Claire's story is invoked not to sensationalize but to underscore the urgency of intervention. Ethan's personal life has grown steadier. Marriage has brought new dimensions of trust and vulnerability. He remains attentive to emotional undercurrents, determined to cultivate openness rather than suppression. When disagreements arise, he confronts them directly, aware that avoidance can breed misunderstanding. His partner understands the layers of history he carries and approaches them with patience. Together they build routines defined not by fear, but by mutual respect. There are moments, however, when the past surfaces unexpectedly. A news report about another missing woman. A headline referencing a family secret uncovered years later. In those instances, Ethan feels a familiar tightening in his chest. He allows himself to acknowledge it, to sit with the memory rather than push it away. Therapy has taught him that avoidance only amplifies shadows. By facing them, he diminishes their control. Claire's daughter often visits schools and community centers, speaking about recognizing subtle indicators of abuse. She emphasizes that not all violence leaves visible bruises, that emotional manipulation can be equally corrosive. Her presentations blend personal narrative with data, weaving empathy with evidence. She encourages audiences to challenge the reflex to dismiss concerns as private affairs. Silence, she reminds them, can be lethal. Law enforcement agencies across Sydney maintain periodic reviews of unresolved disappearances from the early 2000s. Claire's case demonstrated that breakthroughs can emerge from unexpected sources, including delayed testimony from within families. Detectives now receive additional training on interviewing minors in domestic contexts, focusing on building trust rather than extracting immediate statements. The goal is not only to solve crimes, but to prevent them from festering in secrecy. As the 20th anniversary of Claire's death passes, a modest documentary airs on public television, revisiting the case with restraint and depth. It features interviews with investigators, advocates, and community members. Ethan and his sister participate selectively, choosing to highlight systemic change rather than personal anguish. The documentary concludes with a focus on prevention, on the resources now available for those trapped in volatile households. After its broadcast, Ethan receives messages from strangers expressing gratitude for his courage. Some share their own stories of silence and eventual disclosure. He reads them carefully, aware that his visibility may encourage others to step forward. Responsibility accompanies that awareness, but it is a responsibility he accepts willingly. In quieter hours, he visits his mother's grave, bringing simple bouquets rather than elaborate arrangements. He speaks about ordinary milestones, about progress in legislation, about young people who found help before situations escalated. He tells her that her story continues to shape lives in ways neither of them could have imagined. The grief remains, but it is tempered by purpose. Sydney continues its restless evolution, yet beneath its expanding skyline lies an undercurrent shaped by cases like Claire's. The city has learned incrementally to question appearances, to listen more closely to whispers of distress. The Donovan case is no longer breaking news, but it remains a reference point, a reminder etched into institutional memory. Sydney 2005 cold case solved, family secret leads to midnight arrest. The headline once signaled closure, now it signifies transformation. It represents the journey from disappearance to discovery, from silence to testimony, from private terror to public reckoning. It stands as proof that truth can outlast concealment, that justice, though delayed, can still assert itself with undeniable force. And in the steady rhythm of daily life, in offices and classrooms and quiet suburban streets, the legacy of that winter night continues to shape choices and commitments. It lives in the courage of a former teenager who found his voice, in the determination of a daughter who turned grief into reform, in a community that shows awareness over complacency. The story that began in a kitchen in 2005 does not end with a verdict or a sentence. It endures as a testament to resilience, to vigilance, and to the unyielding persistence of truth. Long after the verdict was read and the prison gates closed behind Mark Donovan, the case continued to breathe in the spaces between memory and routine. In the quiet reflections of a city that had once watched in disbelief as a family secret unraveled under the glare of national attention, Sydney did not erupt in outrage anymore. It absorbed the story into its institutional memory, into training manuals and policy debates, into the subtle recalibration of how neighbors interpret raised voices behind thin suburban walls. Sydney 2005 cold case solved, family secret leads to midnight arrest. The headline that once thundered across screens now lingered as a lesson, less sensational but more enduring. Ethan Donovan often found himself thinking not about the night of the crime, but about the years that followed. The slow erosion of certainty as suspicion settled over his family like a fog that never quite lifted. He remembered the school corridors where conversations hushed as he passed, the teachers who spoke to him with a blend of pity and caution, the friends who drifted away because they did not know what to say. In those years, he carried two burdens: the public mystery of his mother's disappearance and the private knowledge of what had truly happened. That dual existence shaped him more profoundly than the courtroom ever could. Now, as he stood before conference audiences discussing the psychology of coerced silence, he understood that his experience had become both personal history and professional reference. He spoke about cognitive dissonance in children exposed to domestic violence, about how loyalty can be weaponized, about how fear can masquerade as love. Experts in the audience nodded, recognizing the patterns he described. They discussed intervention models, early detection strategies, cross-agency collaboration. The Donovan case, once an isolated tragedy, had become part of a broader framework for understanding hidden abuse. Claire's daughter, whose public appearances had once been tentative, now navigated media interviews with steady composure. She no longer trembled when recounting the timeline. Instead, she focused on the structural gaps that allowed her mother's concerns to remain unaddressed. She advocated for streamlined legal processes for individuals seeking separation from controlling partners, for emergency housing options that did not require lengthy documentation, for community education campaigns that reframed domestic conflict as a potential warning sign rather than a private matter. Her message was consistent: secrecy thrives where discomfort silences inquiry. The neighborhood where Claire had once tended her garden continued its quiet evolution. Property values had recovered, new families had settled in, and the house that once concealed a grave now blended seamlessly into its surroundings. Yet the story had not vanished entirely. Longtime residents still remembered the excavation, the day the concrete was broken and the truth surfaced in fragments of bone and fabric. They recalled the midnight arrest, the flashing lights reflecting off familiar driveways. For them, the case remained a cautionary memory, a reminder that danger can reside behind well-kept facades. Within law enforcement circles, the Donovan investigation was cited as an example of persistence intersecting with technological advancement. Detectives spoke about the importance of revisiting old files with new tools, about how ground-penetrating radar and improved forensic analysis had transformed a suspected homicide into a prosecutable case. Training sessions emphasize that time does not nullify accountability. The phrase cold case no longer carried the same connotation of finality. It suggested potential waiting to be unlocked. Mark Donovan's existence had narrowed to institutional routine. Appeals had failed, and public attention had shifted elsewhere. He rarely appeared in media discussions now, his name invoked primarily in academic contexts analyzing domestic homicide dynamics. Reports indicated that he maintained a version of events centered on panic rather than intent, but outside prison walls, that distinction had lost relevance. The court had rendered its judgment, and the broader community had accepted it as fact. For Ethan, the passage of time introduced a new challenge, learning how to live without defining himself solely through trauma. Advocacy had provided purpose, but he recognized the risk of allowing his identity to crystallize around a single narrative. He pursued interests unrelated to the case, rediscovering hobbies abandoned in adolescence. He traveled cautiously at first, then with growing confidence, experiencing places unconnected to memory. Each new experience layered over the past, not erasing it but reducing its dominance. Therapy sessions shifted focus from processing events to envisioning futures. His counselor encouraged him to articulate goals unrelated to reform or prevention, to imagine a life not anchored exclusively to what had happened in 2005. That exercise proved unexpectedly difficult. Trauma, he realized, can become a framework for meaning. Letting it recede required intentional effort. Slowly, he began to envision milestones defined by personal fulfillment rather than public impact. Claire's daughter balanced advocacy with motherhood, mindful of not allowing activism to eclipse family life. She established boundaries around when and how she discussed the case, ensuring that her children knew their grandmother as more than a victim. She shared stories of Claire's humor, her love of gardening, her resilience. In doing so, she reclaimed aspects of her mother's identity that had been overshadowed by headlines and court transcripts. Public discourse around domestic violence continued to evolve. Campaigns emphasized recognizing non-physical forms of control, encouraging bystanders to report concerns without fear of overstepping. The Donovan case was occasionally referenced as a reminder that appearances can deceive. Experts pointed out that community vigilance must coexist with respect for privacy, a delicate balance requiring ongoing dialogue. On the 25th anniversary of Claire's disappearance, a modest ceremony took place at the Jacaranda Tree Memorial. Attendance was smaller than in previous years, composed mainly of close friends and family. There were no television crews, no reporters. The gathering felt intimate, reflective rather than reactive. Ethan spoke briefly, not about the crime, but about continuity. He described how his mother's story had influenced policies, training programs, and individual decisions across Sydney. He emphasized resilience over tragedy. After the ceremony, he lingered alone near the plaque, tracing his fingers lightly over the engraved letters of Claire's name. He considered how the narrative had shifted over time, from shock to analysis to integration. The case was no longer an open wound in public consciousness. It had become part of the city's fabric, a thread woven into collective awareness about hidden harm and delayed justice. Sydney itself had changed dramatically since 2005. New infrastructure projects, demographic shifts, technological advancements had transformed its skyline and rhythms. Yet beneath those changes, the human dynamics that shaped the Donovan case persisted: relationships, conflicts, secrets, and the potential for both harm and healing. The city's evolution underscored a broader truth: progress is uneven, but it accumulates. Ethan often reflected on the moment he chose to speak after years of silence. That decision, he realized, had been less about courage and more about exhaustion. Carrying the secret had become unsustainable. In sharing it, he had risked upheaval but gained authenticity. That trade-off informed his advice to others grappling with hidden truths. Silence may feel protective, he would say, but it corrodes from within. As years continued to pass, the Donovan case receded further from daily conversation. New stories commanded attention, new crises demanded focus. Yet in training rooms, policy meetings, and quiet personal reflections, its influence endured. It served as a reference point, a case study in how domestic violence can remain concealed for years, how technological innovation can resurrect dormant investigations, how delayed testimony can unlock justice. Sydney 2005 cold case solved, family secret leads to midnight arrest. The headline had once encapsulated revelation and reckoning. Now it signified legacy. It represented the arc from disappearance to accountability, from fear to voice. It stood as evidence that truth, however deeply buried, exerts pressure until it surfaces. In the steady hum of daily life, in classrooms and offices and suburban streets, the Donovan story continued to shape choices in subtle ways. It influenced how neighbors checked in on one another, how police approached cold files, how children were encouraged to speak about discomfort at home. It became less about one family's tragedy and more about a collective commitment to vigilance and compassion. And so the narrative that began with a half-chopped onion on a kitchen bench in 2005 extended far beyond that moment. It stretched into policy reforms, into advocacy networks, into the quiet determination of two siblings who refused to let silence define their futures. The case had been solved, the perpetrator imprisoned, the file closed. Yet its resonance endured, a reminder etched into Sydney's memory that even after decades of concealment, truth can emerge. And from that emergence, change can follow. Midnight finally delivered the truth Sydney feared most for years. Police waited silently outside the quiet suburban house past midnight. Inside, a family's secret trembled on the brink of exposure. The cold case from 2005 resurfaced with vengeance. Detectives reopened dusty files stained by heartbreak and broken trust. Photographs of the victim stared back accusingly from forgotten boxes. Her name still echoed through Western Sydney streets at dusk. Neighbors remembered flashing lights and whispered speculation behind drawn curtains. The arrest warrant felt like thunder held back too long. For years, suspicion circled without landing anywhere near the truth. Detectives sensed betrayal hiding beneath ordinary routines and family dinners. Bank records revealed quiet payments between relatives over many seasons. Phone logs mapped conversations cut short abruptly before crucial questions. An anonymous tip shattered years of silence inside that household. The caller described arguments buried beneath polite smiles at holidays. Detectives listened as secrets slowly untangled themselves under harsh lights. A brother denied everything with rehearsed indignation and steady eyes. A sister wept, recalling that terrible night of vanished hope. Their mother clutched photographs, fading at edges through restless years. She insisted the past should remain undisturbed for everyone's sake. But the past clawed back with relentless fury that winter. Forensic science advanced while memories slowly deteriorated in fragile minds. New technology tested evidence once considered useless by earlier teams. A trace of DNA whispered undeniable truth from hidden fibers. It pointed inward, not toward strangers outside the family circle. Shock rippled through investigators hardened by tragedy and long nights. The prime suspect attended every memorial vigil with solemn devotion. He hugged grieving friends beneath television cameras and bright lights. He spoke of justice with convincing conviction to local reporters. Yet behind closed doors, resentment simmered violently for hidden reasons. Financial pressure mounted after failed business ventures drained shared savings. Insurance policies suddenly appeared months before disappearance, raising silent alarms. Detectives reconstructed timelines with painstaking precision across that fateful evening. A car was seen circling darkened streets near the harbor. Security footage captured headlights pausing briefly beside an abandoned warehouse. The driver resembled someone trusted implicitly within the grieving family. Detectives confronted him with quiet determination inside a sterile room. He denied again, repeating carefully crafted phrases from earlier interviews. But cracks formed under relentless questioning about missing midnight hours. His timeline shifted by crucial minutes that changed everything forever. Witnesses remembered raised voices behind thin walls that stormy night. A neighbor heard something heavy dragged outside toward waiting vehicle. Rain began washing away fragile evidence before dawn finally arrived. Years later, that storm felt symbolic of truth nearly erased. The victim trusted family above everyone else without hesitation, always. She planned to leave and start anew beyond their control. Her independence threatened fragile egos at home and simmering jealousy. Detectives theorized confrontation spiraled fatally during that heated midnight argument. A single violent moment changed everything irrevocably within that house. Then panic dictated desperate, irreversible choices under suffocating fear inside. The body vanished, leaving questions screaming into the empty night. Search parties combed bushland along the outskirts for endless days. Volunteers carried hope like fragile glass across rugged terrain nearby. No trace surfaced despite relentless effort from police and locals. Grief settled over Sydney like suffocating fog that refused lifting. Birthdays passed marked by empty chairs at family gatherings annually. The suspect played supportive relative convincingly throughout the painful years. He comforted his mother during interviews with steady, reassuring words. Detectives never fully dismissed lingering doubts about his hidden anger. Still, evidence remained painfully circumstantial without decisive forensic confirmation then. The file gathered dust inside archives beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Young detectives later reopened forgotten boxes with fresh, determined eyes. They saw patterns predecessors overlooked entirely within those faded statements. Money transferred secretly days after disappearance into his private account. Confronted again, he faltered noticeably as silence filled interrogation room. Sweat formed despite cold-conditioned air blowing steadily overhead vents. Detectives pressed harder, presenting scientific proof linking him conclusively inside. The DNA matched beyond reasonable doubt to those recovered fibers. Silence followed, heavy as collapsing walls around his fragile composure. Finally, he whispered fragmented admissions about that terrible hidden night. He claimed panic, not premeditated malice, drove his fatal actions. Investigators documented every trembling word carefully for impending court proceedings. Outside reporters sensed seismic developments stirring within that long saga. At midnight, officers executed the warrant with swift, coordinated precision. Handcuffs clicked, ending years of deception beneath indifferent suburban stars. Neighbors watched stunned from darkened windows as justice finally arrived. The mother collapsed under crushing revelation that truth lived inside. Community shock erupted across morning headlines throughout Greater Sydney region. Cold case solved proclaimed every newspaper stand across the city. Yet closure felt complicated and incomplete for grieving relatives still. The body remained lost somewhere unknown beneath earth or water. Without remains, funerals felt painfully symbolic, lacking final tangible proof. Prosecutors prepared meticulously for trial against the once trusted brother. Defense attorneys argued flawed recollections and coerced emotional confessions publicly. Courtrooms filled with reporters and relatives awaiting dramatic testimony daily. Graphic evidence unfolded under glaring lights before hushed, attentive jurors. The confession echoed through packed chambers like thunder finally released. He described struggle escalating beyond control during that fatal confrontation. Jurors listened, faces carved from stone absorbing grim family truths. The mother avoided his searching eyes across the crowded courtroom. Verdict day arrived thick with tension gripping every anxious breath. Guilty resonated like a final hammer striking long-delayed justice. Sentencing brought neither celebration nor relief, only solemn, exhausted silence. Decades awaited behind unforgiving prison walls for his confessed crime. The community gathered, remembering the victim beneath soft candlelit vigils. Stories resurfaced about her laughter and unfulfilled radiant future plans. Parents warned children about hidden dangers within seemingly safe homes. Trust once fractured never fully restores after such intimate betrayal. Detectives reflected on persistence and patience that conquered relentless silence. Technology proved a lie against fading memories in long dormant cases. Still, unanswered questions lingered stubbornly about exact burial location unknown. Search efforts quietly resumed beyond headlines across remote coastal stretches. Investigators hoped confession might guide them toward concealed resting place. He offered vague directions, lacking clarity during subsequent prison interviews. Tides shifted, sands concealing potential graves along isolated shorelines. The ocean kept secrets with indifferent rhythm beneath moonlit skies. Each anniversary reignited sorrowful remembrance within hearts across Sydney suburbs. Flowers appeared quietly at her memorial beside framed fading portrait. Strangers whispered prayers, passing respectfully through that solemn sacred space. The solved case still felt haunting despite courtroom final verdict. Justice arrived, yet absence persisted within that broken, grieving family. A secret once hidden destroyed everything it sought to protect. Midnight arrests rarely erase pain accumulated over decades of grief. The house stands quiet under watchful skies in Western Sydney. New occupants sense uneasy history within those aging suburban walls. Neighbors still recall flashing patrol lights cutting through midnight darkness. Children grown now understand the headlines that shaped their youth. The brother sits counting endless days behind cold steel bars. Remorse surfaces during rare interviews with investigative journalists seeking insight. He claims truth finally liberated him from suffocating lifelong lies. Yet liberation never reaches the grave where she lies unknown. Detectives vow to continue searching tirelessly until remains are found. Advances in mapping may reveal secrets buried beneath shifting terrain. Hope flickers stubborn against despair within investigators seasoned by tragedy. The case transformed policing culture locally, emphasizing cold case reviews. Training now highlights family violence warning signs for young officers. Community forums discuss hidden domestic tensions before they explode tragically. Her story fuels advocacy across Australia against silent household abuse. Though solved, the narrative remains chilling for every attentive listener. It warns that monsters wear familiar faces within loving homes. The midnight arrest closed one chapter of this harrowing saga. Another chapter waits beneath restless soil, guarding secrets still hidden. Sydney remembers even as years advance beyond that dark winter. Memory keeps her presence fiercely alive inside collective grieving hearts. Candle flames reflect in tearful eyes during annual remembrance services. The harbor breeze carries whispered promises to seek full closure. Justice partially served still demands completion through final discovery someday. Until then, questions echo relentlessly through quiet suburban midnight streets. The cold case once forgotten stands resolved in official records. But emotional ledgers remain unsettled within that fractured mourning family. Silence now tells a different story about courage and truth. A secret exposed can never return to comfortable hidden shadows. The arrest proved patience conquers deceit despite overwhelming passing years. Investigators aged yet never surrendered hope for eventual decisive breakthrough. Their dedication honored the silenced victim more than words could. In court, her photograph watched silently over those final proceedings. That image reminded everyone why this relentless pursuit truly mattered. Sydney learned painful lessons about trust within intimate family bonds. The night of reckoning changed everything for generations yet unborn. And the story lingers, refusing silence across Sydney forevermore. Years after the midnight arrest, the case refused to fade into simple closure because truth, once unearthed, does not lie quietly. It reverberates through court transcripts, through living rooms, through the uneasy silence of a family that once posed for smiling photographs now stained by betrayal. Sydney had declared the mystery solved. Headlines had celebrated the breakthrough. Commentators had praised the relentless detectives who refused to let 2005 remain a cold, forgotten year. Yet beneath the official narrative, another tension pulsed, stubborn and unresolved. The body was still missing. The confession, though detailed, felt incomplete. And in the absence of physical remains, doubt lingered like a shadow at dusk, stretching longer than expected. Investigators returned to the confession repeatedly, dissecting every syllable, mapping each claimed movement against terrain altered by time. Coastal erosion had reshaped cliffs. New housing developments covered empty lots that once stood silent and dark. Bushland had burned and regrown. If he had buried her, where exactly? If he had chosen water, which inlet, which tide, which forgotten pocket of shoreline along Greater Sydney could still hold that final secret? Search teams mobilized quietly without the spectacle of the original investigation. Drones swept over remote stretches of scrub. Ground-penetrating radar scans suspicious depressions in earth hardened by years of sun. Divers descended into murky waters along secluded coves where fishermen rarely cast lines. Each effort carried hope, and each returned with nothing but sediment and silence. Meanwhile, inside prison walls, the convicted brother adjusted to a new reality measured in routine and steel. Interviews revealed fragments of remorse, but also calculated restraint. He maintained that panic had dictated his actions, that he had not intended for confrontation to escalate into fatal violence, that fear of disgrace had driven concealment. Yet prosecutors argued that insurance policies taken months earlier told a colder story. Financial desperation painted a darker motive. The community, watching from afar, divided into camps of certainty and skepticism. Some believed justice had been fully served. Others whispered that perhaps more had been hidden, that perhaps someone else inside that family knew more than they admitted. The mother retreated from public life entirely. Curtains remained drawn at the old house until it was finally sold. Neighbors described her as diminished, a figure moving slowly through supermarket aisles, avoiding eye contact, carrying grief compounded by guilt no court could quantify. Memorial services continued each year, candles flickering beside a framed photograph of a young woman frozen forever in promise. Friends spoke of her laughter, her plans to leave, her arguments about independence that once seemed trivial and now felt prophetic. Detectives, many of them retired, gathered privately on anniversaries, reflecting on the case that defined their careers. They spoke of missed clues in 2005, of limited forensic tools, of interviews conducted before digital records could be so thoroughly cross-referenced. Advances in DNA analysis had ultimately cracked the silence, a microscopic trace clinging to fabric that endured where memory faltered. The lesson was clear. Time can conceal, but it can also preserve. Still, the missing remains haunted every conversation. Without a gravesite, mourning felt suspended, incomplete. Psychologists explain that unresolved disappearance carries a unique cruelty, trapping families between acceptance and imagination. The sister, who had testified with troubling clarity during trial, later admitted that she still dreamed of her sibling walking through the door, unharmed, apologizing for the chaos. Trauma rewrites logic. Even verdicts cannot fully silence the irrational hope that flickers in the dark. As years passed, documentaries revisited the story. Crime forums dissected timelines, debated motive, analyzed body language from archived interviews. Amateur sleuths proposed alternative burial sites, scrutinized satellite imagery, speculated about accomplices without evidence. Police maintained confidence in the conviction, yet remained open to credible leads about the body's location. Tips trickled in occasionally, often vague, sometimes malicious, each requiring assessment, most dissolved under scrutiny. A construction crew once reported discovering bone fragments during excavation, triggering temporary frenzy, only for forensic testing to confirm animal origin. The emotional toll of such false alarms accumulated quietly among investigators and family alike. In prison, appeals were filed and denied. Defense arguments questioned interrogation techniques, suggested psychological pressure, challenged interpretation of forensic data. Appellate courts upheld the verdict, citing overwhelming corroboration. Legally, the case was settled. Emotionally, it was anything but. Sydney itself evolved around the memory. New high-rises pierced skylines that once overlooked search areas. Children who had watched news bulletins in 2005 became adults raising families of their own, recounting the story as cautionary tale about secrets festering behind suburban facades. Schools invited speakers to discuss domestic conflict and warning signs. Advocacy groups referenced the case when lobbying for stronger support services for individuals planning to leave volatile households. In that way, tragedy generated awareness, though at an unimaginable cost. The house where it happened changed ownership twice. Renovations stripped interiors down to studs, repainting walls that once absorbed raised voices. Real estate listings avoided mention of history, yet online archives ensured it could never be fully erased. Prospective buyers conducted late-night searches, confronting headlines before stepping inside. Some withdrew offers, others proceeded, convinced that bricks and mortar carry no blame. Forensic teams revisited stored evidence periodically as technology advanced further, seeking overlooked microscopic clues that might refine the burial hypothesis. Soil samples were reanalyzed for trace minerals matching specific coastal zones. Vehicle fibers were compared against environmental databases not available in 2005. Each scientific stride rekindled cautious optimism. And yet, the landscape kept its silence. The convicted brother eventually provided a new statement during a parole-related psychological evaluation, hinting that fear had distorted his memory of disposal location. He suggested stress may have altered his recollection of distance driven that night. Investigators treated the claim skeptically, but pursued it nonetheless, recalculating potential routes using traffic data reconstructed from archived municipal records. They simulated driving times under weather conditions documented that stormy evening. Rainfall logs confirmed heavy downpour between midnight and 3 a.m., consistent with his description of obscured visibility. But rainfall also complicates burial, saturating soil, increasing weight, reducing concealment ease. Experts debated feasibility. The more details surfaced, the more complex the narrative became. Public interest surged again when a podcast released previously and heard interrogation excerpts obtained through Freedom of Information requests. Listeners analyzed pauses, tone shifts, breathing patterns. Some interpreted sincerity, others detected manipulation. The court of public opinion reconvened, as relentless as ever. Through it all, the absence of remains persisted as the final unanswered chapter. The sister visited coastal overlooks alone sometimes, staring at restless waves, imagining secrets beneath shifting tides. She expressed conflicting emotions in rare interviews, relief that truth emerged, anguish that her brother was responsible, frustration that the precise resting place remained unknown. Grief layered upon grief creates a landscape of contradictions. Detectives nearing retirement described the case as both triumph and torment. Triumph because persistence prevailed. Torment because resolution without recovery feels partial. They emphasized that cold cases demand institutional memory, that files must not be abandoned simply because leads dry up. The breakthrough, they insisted, came from refusing to accept silence as permanent. Younger officers listened, absorbing institutional lessons forged in loss. The city moved forward, yet certain nights still carried echoes. When wind rattled windows during heavy storms, longtime residents recalled that original evening in 2005, the raised voices, the unanswered phone calls, the searchlights cutting through rain. Memory embeds itself in weather, in geography, in collective consciousness. And so the story continued, not as unsolved mystery but as enduring reminder that truth can hide in plain sight for years, protected by familiarity and fear. The midnight arrest closed a legal chapter, yet emotional reverberations continue to shape lives, policies, conversations. Somewhere beyond headlines and transcripts, a patch of earth or stretch of seabed still holds the final physical proof of what happened that night. Investigators remain committed to finding it, not for conviction, but for completion. Because justice, though declared in court, seeks a tangible resting place. Until that discovery occurs, candles will keep burning. Each anniversary of questions will linger in quiet suburban streets. And Sydney will remember that beneath ordinary roofs, extraordinary secrets can sleep for years before finally, inevitably, demanding to be exposed. 2 decades after that storm-soaked night in 2005, the word closure still feels fragile in Sydney, as if it might shatter under the slightest pressure. Because while a conviction stands firm in court records, the earth has yet to surrender its final secret. The case that once dominated front pages, the disappearance that froze a family in suspended disbelief, the midnight arrest that reignited headlines across the city. All of it has settled into history, yet history here does not rest quietly. It breathes in archived footage, in yellowing newspaper clippings, in the careful voices of detectives who still lower their tone when speaking her name. The official narrative says the mystery was solved, that forensic science pierced through years of denial, that a brother's confession ended the long season of doubt. But absence is stubborn. Without a grave, grief circles endlessly, unable to land. In Western Sydney, the suburban street where it began looks ordinary again. Children ride bicycles past trimmed lawns, delivery vans idle briefly before moving on. The house itself has been repainted, renovated, reshaped by new owners determined to create distance from the past. Yet longtime neighbors remember flashing lights slicing through darkness, remember officers knocking on doors. Remember the hollow expressions of a family insisting they did not know where she had gone. Those early days were filled with posters taped to shop windows, volunteer search parties combing through bushland, helicopters scanning from above as hope flickered against gathering dread. When weeks turned to months, and months into years, hope thinned but never fully vanished. Missing, not declared dead, gone, but not buried. The breakthrough that came years later felt almost cinematic. A re-examined piece of fabric, a microscopic trace preserved against time. Advances in DNA testing that earlier investigators could only have imagined. Detectives reopened boxes stored deep in evidence lockers, guided by fresh eyes and relentless curiosity. What had once been inconclusive now spoke clearly. The science pointed inward toward someone who had stood at every vigil, who had embraced grieving relatives beneath camera flashes, who had insisted with unwavering conviction that justice must be found. The shock of that revelation rippled through the community like a sudden earthquake. Betrayal carries a particular cruelty when it originates inside the family circle. The midnight arrest remains etched in memory, officers arriving with quiet coordination. A door opening to disbelief, handcuffs closing with finality. Reporters gathering before dawn as whispers spread across radio stations and morning bulletins. Cold case solved, headlines declared, family secret exposed. Sydney awakened to a narrative it had never fully anticipated, even after years of speculation. In court, the confession unfolded in fragments, each detail reconstructing a confrontation that escalated beyond control. Financial strain, insurance policies, arguments about independence and departure, a storm outside mirroring chaos within. Panic, concealment, irreversible choices. The jury listened, the verdict came guilty. And yet, even as the legal system pronounced its judgment, a single question remained suspended in the air. Where is she? The convicted brother described disposing of the body in fear and confusion, but his account lacked precision. Stress, he claimed, blurred his memory. Investigators retraced his possible routes using reconstructed traffic patterns and archived weather data. They calculated distances he could have driven within specific time windows. They mapped isolated stretches of coastline, remote patches of scrubland, abandoned industrial zones that existed in 2005 but have since transformed under development. Search teams returned again and again, guided by technology more advanced each year. Ground-penetrating radar swept across uneven terrain. Cadaver dogs followed faint, uncertain traces. Divers descended into inlets where tides churn relentlessly, shifting sand, concealing and revealing in equal measure. Still, nothing definitive emerged. For the family, the absence of remains complicates every milestone. Birthdays arrive without a gravesite to visit. Anniversaries pass marked by candles and photographs, rather than flowers placed upon stone. The mother, once a central figure in televised appeals, withdrew from public life after the conviction. Grief layered with guilt reshaped her existence. Friends describe her as quieter now, moving carefully through daily routines, carrying a sorrow too complex for simple language. The sister, who testified with visible anguish, speaks occasionally about the paradox of relief and devastation. Relief that truth surfaced, devastation that truth implicated blood. Trauma does not resolve neatly, it fractures and reforms in unpredictable patterns. The broader community absorbed lessons as well. Advocacy groups cite the case when discussing hidden domestic conflict, the danger of assuming safety within familiar walls. Police training programs reference investigative missteps from the early years, emphasizing the necessity of preserving evidence even when leads appear exhausted. The case reshaped protocol for cold case reviews across the region, proving that patience and evolving science can revive what once seemed permanently stalled. Younger detectives study it as a blueprint for persistence, a reminder that silence does not equal innocence. Public fascination never fully faded. Documentaries revisited the timeline. Podcasts dissected interrogation footage released through legal channels. Online forums debated motive, scrutinized body language, questioned whether every truth had been uncovered. Some speculated about accomplices without evidence, others defended the integrity of the investigation. In the digital age, a solved case does not escape scrutiny. It transforms into a living archive open to continuous reinterpretation. Authorities maintain confidence in the conviction, yet they remain attentive to credible information regarding the body's location. Tips arrive sporadically, most unsubstantiated, each requiring evaluation. False alarms reopen wounds, but they also reaffirm commitment to completeness. Inside prison walls, the man at the center of it all measures time differently now. Appeals were filed and denied. Sentencing stands. In rare interviews conducted years after conviction, he expresses remorse, framing his actions as a catastrophic moment of anger compounded by fear. Observers debate sincerity. Psychologists analyze patterns of minimization and acceptance. The truth of intent may never be fully understood beyond what unfolded that night. What remains undeniable is the irreversible outcome. A life ended, a family fractured, a city altered. Sydney itself has changed. Skylines have risen. Neighborhoods have evolved. New residents occupy spaces once shadowed by suspicion. Yet collective memory persists. Older locals recall the early search efforts, the sense of communal determination, the exhaustion when leads dried up. They remember how the case became shorthand for unresolved tragedy, how each anniversary rekindled headlines asking whether justice would ever arrive. When it finally did, it carried both satisfaction and sorrow, a reminder that answers sometimes surface too late to repair what was broken. The ongoing search for her remains continues quietly, methodically. For investigators, it is not about securing another conviction. It is about dignity. Recovery would allow a funeral grounded in certainty rather than symbolism. It would provide a place for mourning anchored in earth rather than imagination. Experts in forensic geology have joined efforts analyzing soil composition from areas identified in revised root models. Marine specialists evaluate sediment drift patterns in coastal zones affected by storms similar to that night in 2005. Each scientific advancement offers renewed possibility. Each unsuccessful sweep underscores the resilience of concealment. In conversations with retired detectives, a common theme emerges: the belief that time is both adversary and ally. Time erodes landscapes, scatters evidence, dims memories. But time also preserves microscopic traces, advances technology, weakens false narratives. Without time, the case might have remained permanently unresolved. With time, the truth emerged, though incomplete. That duality defines the legacy of this story. As another anniversary approaches, candles will once again flicker beneath her photograph. Friends will recount stories of ambition and laughter. The sister may stand at a coastal overlook, listening to waves that guard their secrets with indifferent rhythm. The city will move through its routines, largely unaware of the quiet determination that persists among a small group of investigators still committed to finding what was lost. The legal chapter has closed. The emotional one continues. Because a cold case solved on paper does not erase absence from a dinner table. A midnight arrest does not silence echoes in an empty bedroom. A confession, even when validated by science, cannot point precisely to a hidden grave unless the earth itself cooperates. And so Sydney carries this story forward, not as an unsolved mystery, but as a testament to persistence, to the dangers of secrets nurtured in silence, and to the enduring human need for tangible closure. Somewhere beyond the reach of headlines and courtrooms, the final piece of this tragedy waits. Until it is found, the narrative remains alive, a reminder that justice, though declared, sometimes continues its search long after the verdict has been read. 21 years have passed since that rain lashed the quiet street in Western Sydney, and still the air around this case feels charged, as if the storm never truly moved on. The records say it is solved. The court transcripts confirm a conviction. The prison system holds the man responsible. Yet beneath official language, beneath sealed evidence bags and archived footage, something restless remains. Because justice, in its most complete form, demands more than a verdict. It demands a resting place. It demands earth turned, bones recovered, a final goodbye spoken over certainty instead of imagination. In 2005, she vanished without warning. One evening she was there, moving through familiar rooms, arguing perhaps, planning perhaps, dreaming of departure. The next morning she was a headline. Missing woman, community shock, family appeals. Detectives canvassed neighbors who remembered nothing unusual beyond the heavy rain. Posters multiplied across shop fronts. Volunteers formed lines through bushland. Helicopters circled. Days stretched into weeks, and hope slowly thinned but refused to die. Her family stood before cameras insisting they believed she would return. Among them, her brother appeared resolute, protective, composed. Years blurred, birthdays passed marked by candles and unanswered questions. Detectives rotated assignments. Leads cooled, evidence settled into storage. The case earned a label that carries both resignation and defiance. Cold. Yet cold does not mean forgotten. It means waiting. Waiting for technology. Waiting for a mistake. Waiting for a crack in a story told too many times. That crack arrived not with drama but with diligence. A forensic review, routine in appearance, revolutionary in consequence. Advances in DNA analysis capable of extracting truth from what once seemed meaningless. Fibers preserved from a vehicle. A trace that survived time. The science did not hesitate. It pointed inward towards someone who had stood at memorials, who had embraced his grieving mother, who had spoken of justice with unwavering conviction. The revelation detonated across Sydney like delayed thunder. The midnight arrest felt cinematic yet grimly real. Officers arriving under cover of darkness, a warrant executed with steady precision. Handcuffs closing around wrists that had once held candles at vigils. Morning headlines exploded. Cold case breakthrough, family secret exposed. Shock rippled through neighbors who had trusted what they saw on the surface. Betrayal, when rooted in blood, cuts deeper than any stranger's crime. In court, the narrative unfolded in fragments sharp enough to wound. Financial strain tightening like a vice, insurance policies taken months before the disappearance, arguments about independence, about leaving, about money. A confrontation escalating beyond control, panic flooding reason. A decision made in fear that sealed irreversible fate. Jurors listened to the confession measured against forensic evidence, against timelines reconstructed from archived weather reports and traffic data. Rainfall logs confirmed the storm that night. Digital mapping traced possible routes driven in the early hours. The verdict came down with finality, guilty, but the body remained absent. Investigators returned to the map again and again, recalculating distances, revisiting coastal stretches where tides churn relentlessly. Ground-penetrating radar swept across patches of bushland now surrounded by new housing developments. Cadaver dogs moved through undergrowth that had burned and regrown in the years since. Divers descended into murky inlets, searching where visibility vanished within seconds. Each operation carried hope. Each concluded with silence. The convicted brother offered descriptions, but never precision. He spoke of darkness, of rain, of panic clouding memory. He suggested he drove without clear direction, that stress distorted distance and time. Detectives tested his claims, reconstructing potential routes under similar weather conditions. They measured fuel consumption, evaluated traffic light sequences from archived municipal data, considered roadworks that existed in 2005 but have since disappeared. The calculations narrowed possibilities but never delivered certainty. For her sister, the absence is a wound that refuses to close. In interviews years later, she speaks of contradictory emotions. Relief that truth surfaced, anger that it emerged so late, devastation that it implicated someone she once trusted completely. She describes dreams in which her sibling returns, unharmed, as if the intervening decades were a misunderstanding. Trauma bends reality in ways logic cannot untangle. The mother retreated from public view after the conviction. Friends describe a woman diminished by compounded grief, moving quietly through daily routines. To lose a daughter to violence is unthinkable. To learn a son was responsible fractures identity itself. Public sympathy mixes with private anguish. There are no simple narratives left for her, only layers of sorrow that shift with each passing year. Sydney has evolved around the memory of this case. New apartment towers rise where empty lots once stood during early searches. Children who watched the original news coverage are now adults with families of their own. The story is retold as cautionary tale, as reminder that danger sometimes resides behind familiar doors. Police academies reference investigative lessons drawn from the early missteps. Preserve everything, re-examine assumptions. Never dismiss the possibility that the truth hides in proximity. True crime media revisits the case periodically, releasing archival interrogation footage obtained through legal channels. Viewers analyze pauses, tone shifts, the subtle language of guilt and denial. Online forums debate whether every detail has been revealed. Authorities maintain confidence in the conviction, yet remain open to credible information about the body's location. Tips continue to arrive, most vague, some cruel, each is evaluated. Most dissolve under scrutiny. Inside prison walls, the man at the center of the storm lives within a rigid routine measured by counts and concrete. Appeals have failed. Sentencing stands. In rare statements, he expresses remorse, framing his actions as a catastrophic loss of control. Observers question the depth of that remorse, whether it reaches beyond regret for consequences. Psychological assessments note patterns of minimization common in domestic homicide cases. The law has rendered its judgment. Moral reckoning is less quantifiable. Experts in forensic geology and marine science have joined renewed efforts to locate remains. Soil samples from areas identified in revised route models undergo chemical comparison against trace materials recovered from the vehicle. Sediment drift simulations attempt to predict how heavy rainfall and tidal patterns in 2005 could have altered burial sites or submerged evidence. Technology grows more sophisticated each year, and with it, cautious optimism resurfaces. If microscopic DNA could survive, perhaps other traces endure as well. Retired detectives speak of the case as both triumph and unfinished business. Triumph because perseverance dismantled a lie sustained for years. Unfinished because a family still lacks a gravesite. They emphasize that cold cases demand institutional memory, that files must be revisited not out of nostalgia, but necessity. The breakthrough, they insist, came from refusing to let silence harden into acceptance. On anniversaries, candles flicker beneath her photograph. Friends recount stories of ambition and laughter. They speak her name aloud, anchoring memory against erosion. The absence of remains transforms these gatherings into acts of defiance against oblivion. As long as she is remembered, she is not erased. And so the story endures, not as an unsolved mystery, but as a reminder that resolution can be partial, that justice can be declared yet still feel incomplete. Somewhere beyond suburban streets and coastal cliffs, beyond courtrooms and prison walls, the final physical evidence of that stormy night waits. Whether hidden beneath earth hardened by years of sun or concealed within waters that refuse to give up what they claim, it remains the last unanswered question. Sydney continues forward, bustling, expanding, evolving. But beneath its movement lies a quiet awareness shaped by this case. Trust, once broken within a family, radiates outward. Secrets, once exposed, alter communities. And the search, though quieter now, persists. Because until the earth yields its truth, Until a resting place is found, the echo of that midnight confrontation will linger, a reminder that some storms never fully pass. They simply fade into the background, waiting for the final piece of justice to be uncovered.